I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Margarita Calderon. She says it better than me, Calderon. Dr. Calderon is a researcher at Johns Hopkins University, but I'd be grateful if you tell us more about your background and just for anybody who might not know who you are.
Sure. I'll start with when I was a high school teacher, way back in the dark ages. Yeah, only about 55 years ago or so. And I was teaching ESL. They asked me to teach ESL. And so I did. I had a curriculum and I started working with that curriculum. But it went something like this. Students, this is a wall. The wall is white. Everybody answer. What color is the wall? And it was that way. It was supposed to be that way for months. And I said, there's something wrong with this picture. So I started a master's in applied linguistics at the University of Texas, El Paso. And that was the beginning of a great partnership with my students and my professor. I would learn something in my professor's class, take it to my students, and literally say, do you think we could do something with this? Let's try it. And then I would get some feedback from them, and yay or nay, or, if you change this, it'll work. I would take it back to my professor, and then we would try to work the kinks out, come up with something more refined to test with the students. And so that was the beginning of having a wonderful coach who was my professor. But then the students were also my coaches. we learned together, and it was wonderful. So fast forward, I wound up at San Diego State University as regional coordinator of professional development, which meant that I could offer professional development institutes to teachers, administrators, coaches from Riverside, San Bernardino, and Coachella. That was the old Coachella, not this this new Coachella. And so at that time, our center, Multifunctional Resource Center, had tons of money, and I was able to bring all kinds of emergent researchers, and that had to do with second language acquisition. And what we would do at these institutes is for these, we call them the movie stars. They were from Canada, from the United States, and even some other countries as well. And the movie stars would present in the morning. Then the participants in the institute and I would work in the afternoon together in teams to try to make sense of all these theories, hypotheses that they were presenting, because at that time, this was around 79, 80, there wasn't much research having to do with evidence-based instruction for multilingual learners. And so that worked really well because we came up with a framework, a couple of instructional strategies. And then in a couple of months, I noticed that not all the teachers were implementing. And yeah. And so I reached out to Bruce Joyce in Beverly Showers. Yeah. And they were my first mentors in this endeavor that had to do with coaching. Yes. I don't think you were around yet.
I've certainly read, I don't know when that article came out from Joyce and Showers, but it was definitely a pioneering article to show this is what happens when you have coaching versus when you don't have coaching. And When I started to work, that was kind of the article that people would quote. It was pretty much the only thing that was out there. So that would be great people to work with for sure. That's the place to go to.
Definitely, we thought so, and so not only did they present the models of teaching, but they also emphasized the need for coaching, transfer. How do we transfer from the workshop to the teacher's repertoire, and then student impact? So I decided to do my dissertation at that time on coaching. Yeah. And then, this was, uh, also an opportunity to do some quantitative studies, empirical studies, because there weren't any on English learners. And from the, groups of teachers and resource teachers and administrators we had, I selected 24 and I split them up into two groups. Of course, I had the low implementers and the medium kind of sort of implementers, and then the wonderful gung ho implementers. So those were the two groups that I had. The only difference, the main variable was that this group received coaching every 2 weeks. This group, no coaching at all. So you can imagine what happened at the end of the year. It took me a whole year to do this dissertation, uh, but by the end of the year, the differences were huge, just huge, and so that was my first empirical study, and the beginning of the rest of my studies that I later took uh, upon myself, but with my colleagues from Johns Hopkins University.
So, anything else you want to say about how this particular book, Coaching for Multilingual Excellence, how did this book come to be?
I think you know some of the Corwin people, Corwin Press.
Right.
Uh-huh. And there's this fantastic person, Dan Alpert. He was my first editor back in 2003. That was my first book. And since then, I've had several Corwin books. Some have been with colleagues, uh, and, and and then but the first one was mine, and he decided to retire, and he says, "Before I retire, will you please write a book on coaching?" I had always inserted a chapter in each one of my books. There's something about coaching and how wonderful it is and how it makes a difference. And so that was the main reason why I wrote this book. Plus, it really brought me back to my I guess, my original love.
Well, I need to read that dissertation. But Dan Albert, I want to say something about him. So at our conference, the Teaching, Learning, Coaching Conference, we have an award called the Don Deschler Leadership Award. So Don was my advisor and mentor and friend and so many important things in my life that we named the award after him. And the award goes to people where we say, if we didn't know them, we wouldn't be who we are. So the very first person was Don. Joellen Killian was one. Michael Fullen was one. Parker Palmer was one. And Loretta Hammond.
Mm.
And Bob Garmston and Art Costa were the winners this year. But Dan won that award. So
Oh.
because he had such a huge impact on me, he edited almost all my books. I think every one after instructional coaching. He still is someone I work with on different things. So we have a mutual respect for Dan Alpert, that's for sure.
That's for sure. Yes, definitely love him, and I do hope to continue to work with him as well.
Right. So why is coaching for multilingual learners so important these days? Why do you think it's essential? That's such an important topic. I've got my own answer, but you're the expert, so I want to hear your answer.
Mhm. Um, Let me split this question into two parts. One, first of all, the demographics. There are 5,400,000 English learners in our schools currently. So that's a lot of English learners. And unfortunately, about anywhere from 50 to 75% of those MLs are what are called long-term Ls, which means that they've been in our schools for 6 or more years. They most likely went to elementary school here, and now they're in middle school and high school, and they're still struggling. They're still not able to pass the language test to exit from ML status, EL status. Um, so that's one reason, or a couple of reasons. And I I think that the other main reason is that teachers have been asking me a lot of questions. So, how do we get our coaches to learn this? Because they're wonderful. We love our coaches, but they really don't know how to teach vocabulary, how to teach academic language, discourse, how to get the students engaged in discourse, much less reading comprehension, which is critical, not just in the elementary school, but in secondary schools. Middle schools and high school teachers were the ones that were most I guess, enthusiastic in knowing that I was writing this book because they felt that, uh, eh, how do you integrate academic language or the teaching of vocabulary, reading comprehension, and text-based writing into biology? How do I do this in my government class? How do I do this in history, not just English language arts, but STEM and all those important courses that are being taught in high schools nowadays. So, thinking about the teachers and thinking about the coaches, then the coaches also started asking. They said, we really want to help, but we really don't know how. And that's why I decided to combine this book with instructional practices, but also with the tools that the coaches will need in order to observe, make sense of what they're observing, coach the teachers, give feedback, um, the way that you have written about. And and so those were the two main reasons that I opted for this.
So who was, I don't know if it's who or whom, but who or whom was the audience? For whom did you write this book? That's really the question. I know that's the correct use of whom. So,
Yeah.
uh,
It was mainly for middle school, high school teachers, or content teachers. Teachers who all of a sudden find that, "Oh, I have 10 English learners in my classroom. What do I do? I don't know what to do." And I asked my coach, but my coach doesn't know how to help me either. So, they were my main reason for an audience for this book, but also the elementary teachers. They wanna know, what do I do in this self-contained classroom where I have a handful of English learners, or I have, 2 handfuls, a dozen English learners, and I have my other students. So, how can I, uh, as a coach, help the teachers, uh, even begin to plan lessons and to select the right words to teach, to look at reading strategies from the textbooks that the students are going to be reading, et cetera, et cetera. So they were interested in learning instructional strategies, but more than anything, they wanted to know, how can I communicate with teachers about this? This is a very touchy subject, as you well know. And some teachers, the principal hires me to help these teachers, but they don't really want to talk about this. And so the coaches not only wanted the typical coaching process, but also, how do I approach it from an assets based perspective and help the teachers and administrators learn to value the multilingual learners.
So, what do you think coaches need to know to do that work?
Mhm. Well, basically that they need to embrace and model an assets-based approach to to not just coaching, but also to become leaders in their school. Uh, there needs to be more leadership in the schools that are committed to multilingual excellence. The principals also need coaches. And if there's a coach that goes through professional development on how do we do, what I mentioned, the vocabulary, the reading comprehension, I call it the whole enchilada. How do we learn about the whole enchilada? And how do it would be so important if the principals would come. So how do I convince the principals to attend these professional development sessions, to take ownership and onus of the implementation, and that they message the whole school, um, reluctant teachers, excited teachers, all the teachers about doing these approaches. But yet, one of the words that we wanted to steer from was fidelity, because teachers don't like that word. Fidelity implies that you have to do it this way. And when it comes to English learners, there is no one way to do this. Yes, there are basic steps for teaching a word. There's a couple of strategies for reading, such as partner reading, but you don't just turn to your partner and read together. Uh, you read it for fluency first, alternating sentences. And then with a peer, they summarize what they just read. They need to articulate what they're reading. They need the discourse, they need the dialogue. Without the dialogue after each paragraph, it's just not going to stay. It won't sink
Right.
in, right? And so that is, that was one of the biggest issues that uh, coaches are dealing with currently.
So, I'm going to tell you about something I'm doing. I am Canadian. I'm a dual citizen now. I have U.S. citizenship, Canadian citizenship. But in Canada, French is an official language, just like English. And I've always felt, I'm almost 70 now, so I should have done this 40, 50 years ago, but I've always felt like I should be fluent in French. I can get by.
Mm.
I can ask for something. I just don't know if I'm going to get it, is what I say. So I've been trying to improve my French, and I try it in dribs and drabs. And sometimes going to France or Quebec is really helpful because I'm around French people. It's great, but I don't get to do that very often. But I've been using ChatGPT, and here's what I'm curious what you think about this. So what I've been doing is, and ChatGPT talks to me. So there's a voice that talks to me. So I'm reading The Little Prince, and
Mm.
I read a sentence, and then I say, "Let me paraphrase this sentence, and you tell me if you've got it right." And then I say, "Would you read me this sentence in French?" And then I say, "Well, let me try it, and when I try it, you tell me how I can improve my pronunciation." So I have this machine, which is like a tutor walking me through it, and it's really escalated my French. I've got a long way to go, but it's been interesting. So I'm wondering what you think about that as you listen to that. What's going through your mind as I talk about that? Does that sound like good practice, or am I missing out? I mean, it would be much better to have a real human being there, but it's way better than, I don't know, just a Duolingo or something where I'm trying to remember stuff all the. It's contextual. So
It is, and it's exactly what we want the students to do, is to hear another speaker, and so partnering with someone a little bit higher than the English learner, in terms of pronunciation, fluency, etc., uh, and also at the same time alternating sentences. So you read a sentence, I read a sentence, and then we go back to the paragraph, and extract the meaning. So what does this paragraph say, Jim? In your words, what do you think it says? And you might say something like, "What do you think our teacher's going to ask us from this paragraph?"
Right.
So, very informal conversations, pretty much what you're having with your your technology. I wish I would have had that when I was teaching high school. It sounds perfect for me, to me. So, yeah, that's a great idea.
It's pretty interesting. You can use it to learn Arabic or Mandarin or whatever you want, and the same voice speaks in Arabic or something. It's kind of astonishing. So, well, but let's get back to it. I wanted to share. So then, tell me a bit about what the coaching looks like and how that sort of relates to the 7 success factors that I've written about. I know you mentioned them, so I'm
Mhm.
curious what you think about that.
The partnership principles, I start with that at the schools because uh, if a school invites me to work, I want to meet with the leadership first of all, and district leadership if possible. So we talk about partnerships and how it's important to build these relationships in order for teachers to not feel apprehensive. Most teachers. Right. If they're not part of this, then they don't want anything to do with it. And so I learned that from you, uh, as well as Bruce and Beverly. But you emphasize communication skills, and that is critical these days because, as we know, communication can take different forms and we're not emphasizing enough positive communication these days. And we want the teachers to feel self assured and that they're valued, especially bilingual teachers or teachers of ESL. Sometimes they don't feel valued. And so we need to bring that up to the forefront. Coaches as leaders can do that. As leaders, they can. Be the powerful advocates for the multilingual learners and their teachers as well, and be that um, I guess the person who is going to continue to communicate with the other leadership as well as help the teachers communicate with families because families of English learners many times do not want to participate in school activities or schooling period because of communication. And so, what are the ways to facilitate communication if the families are also second language learners? I'm going to share the iChat example now. I think that's wonderful. The impact cycle, of course, we have the cycle, but there are certain things that are different. We emphasize academic vocabulary as one of the key components. The discourse, in order to apply that vocabulary that the teacher just taught, and then the reading comprehension as a reading vocabulary that they just learned in a paragraph. They're discussing it, they're applying it. And so that's discourse. So they also need to learn how to observe discourse. How do we observe the students? How do we know if they are actually producing the words and they're producing them adequately? Then they go through other components, social emotional learning. That is critical for English learners. And it's not just something that we do at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. No, social emotional learning entails being self aware, but also learning new competencies. Many students come from countries where they've never even had to sit down in chairs, and they would prefer to sit on the floor. Other students come from countries where they haven't been to school. They don't know what schooling is. So there's a lot of things that affects their self-esteem and their sense of belonging in a classroom. So it starts from there all the way to decision making and how do I interact with my buddy when I'm reading. So these competencies are woven into every aspect of vocabulary reading and writing. Let's see, and the data. The data is the most important thing for English learners. I don't think enough data performance assessments have not been applied in the past. And it's only that test at the end of the year, which really tells the teachers nothing about how English learners are progressing. So ongoing data is critically important, as well as the one at the end of the year. And then the instructional playbook. I have over 100 publications. Many of those are playbooks because somebody wanted a playbook on this and how do you teach this? How do you teach that? So I keep cranking them out and trying to help as much as possible. But perhaps the most important role that a multilingual coach can play is that it's implementing new ways of teaching and of doing things, of valuing, of changing myths and espousing more evidence-based type of instruction and well-being for the students.
Well, I love it. I love it. It's great to hear all those success factors laid out. Um, what's a success story? If you're going to think of the work you've done, what's a success story of coaching around multilingual excellence?
A couple of success stories were I had two middle schools in New York City and two high schools. And in Kauai, I don't know if you've been to Kauai, Kapa'a, middle school, high schools, those participated in the study as well. Of course, when I asked the school district, they gave me the lowest performing schools, of
Mhm.
course. And if you can do it there, you can do it anywhere. That's what they said in New York. Uh, in 2 years, the middle school in Manhattan, Washington Heights, went from almost being reconstituted because it was the lowest performing middle school. It went to the highest performing school in terms of their student outcomes. That was, I still, yeah. And the same thing happened in Kauai, but in Kauai, it was also the high school. The high
Mm.
school was our experimental school, and then there was a control high school. Uh, these kiddos outperformed the control school in everything, including in how many millions of dollars in scholarships they were able to acquire. So
Mm.
I still get emotional over those.
Well, and so you should. I mean, think of the impact on kids and the kids those kids eventually have in their lives. It's a wonderful. It's wonderful to feel like you're making a difference. Tell me, what's a lesson you think all coaches should learn?
Um, I think they should listen to all your podcasts and
That's good.
go to your conferences and
Especially this podcast. Yeah.
oh, I've learned so much from from you, and I just want to recommend the coaches because everything fits perfectly with what coaches, multilingual coaches, need to do, in addition to learning all the things that I mentioned already about uh, evidence-based instruction for multilingual learners. To not be afraid to dispel myths. There's still a lot of myths out there and about instruction. Yeah. And I would say that be on the lookout for ways to do your own studies. We need more studies, whether it's classroom research, coaches research, in multilingual settings. We just don't have enough, and it would be wonderful if they would start with, some very simple studies, but it would all benefit the field.
Mm. I have this last question I like to ask coaching experts like yourself. So, what are three really practical questions, moves, ideas you'd like to share? It doesn't have to be three. That's just a number to have a number. That could be two or one or four. But what are a couple really practical questions, moves, ideas you want to share with coaches?
Um, Use observation protocols
Mm.
because this is a little bit different. Even though it sounds structured, vocabulary, reading, writing. It doesn't have to be too structured, but it is important to have that foundation. How do we teach vocabulary according to evidence-based strategies, and not a lot of cute, interesting strategies that are still being implemented, but the teacher does most of the work, and the students don't do any of the talk. So we want the students to talk, 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 and get the students involved. That would be one, I think, the main one. Um, and uh, Reflect with the teacher, but make sure that the teacher is comfortable, and that there's a goal that makes sense at the end of the feedback session, at the end of the reflection, that there is a goal that makes sense. And if it doesn't, take a look at your communication, take a look at yourself, meet with other coaches, debrief, set your own goals, keep working on this. There's a lot of there's there's a lot of weight on your shoulders, but it's so important.
Anything else you want to share?
A coach is going to have a powerful impact, not just on the teachers, but also the students, the administrators, others. I have great faith in teachers. I've always had great faith in teachers. I believe in teachers. And ever since my dissertation, when I saw the low performing teachers come to the top and do powerful instruction, and the students did so well, teachers just need a lot of love, a lot of attention, a lot of effective coaching.
Mm.
Effective coaching that really addresses the needs that they have these days. It's very different from 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. And this year, I think 1 million more students are coming into classrooms. We don't know what's going to happen next year. We don't know what's happening in 2025, but an additional million is in the schools. And because there's so many students, I think every coach now needs to be prepared to help out not just the students, but the teachers and the schools themselves.
I love it. And I'm so grateful. Margarita, thank you so much. It's such an important book. I don't have the hardback version yet. I've just got my Kindle version, but
Oh, okay.
it's
Well,
good to have the Kindle version. There's the real one right there. So,
good.
um, but thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your contribution to this whole world of coaching. And it's nice for us all to be working together to try to see better outcomes for kids. So I'm grateful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I'm such an admirer of your work, and it just, like I said, it dovetails so nicely with what we've been attempting to do. So I thank you for setting this path for me.